In just 71 days, Donald Trump will be sworn in again as President of the United States. His comeback victory unlike anything we have ever seen in American history. Just take a look at the final results. With Arizona now projected for Trump, he locks in a sweeping victory in every single battleground state. And Trump did more than that. He made big gains with young voters and with Latinos, doing better among Hispanic voters than any Republican presidential candidate since the first exit polls were conducted in 1976. He even did better among women than when he ran against Joe Biden. Also made significant gains in some of the most Democratic places in the country, doing better in places like Brooklyn, New Jersey, and Chicago. And in deep blue California, Donald Trump is on track to do better than any Republican in 2 decades. And he was running against a Californian. He also...
Woo! All we can say is, what did they expect? Boy, oh boy, oh boy. Man.
President-elect Donald Trump is now returning to the White House after an historic political realignment. Mr. Trump swept all 7 battleground states after NBC News projected overnight that he won Arizona. He also tore down the Democratic blue wall and is poised to become the first Republican in 2 decades to win the national popular vote. President-elect Trump, charged with plotting to overturn the last election, now establishing himself as a transformational political force, reshaping American politics in his own image.
We made history for a reason tonight, and the reason is going to be just that. We overcame obstacles that nobody thought possible.
I think that we just witnessed the greatest political comeback in the history of the United States of America.
This decisive victory should shake the Democrat establishment to its core.
This is a new dawn of Republican leadership. With President Trump and J.D. Vance in the White House, we are going to advance an agenda that is an American agenda.
We're going to have the most aggressive first 100 days agenda that anybody's seen in a modern era.
Now, those victories powered by populist frustration, with exit polls showing 3/4 of voters feel dissatisfied or angry about the way things are going in the country. Nearly half of voters saying they strongly disapprove of President Biden. The share who say they've gotten worse off under the current administration, the highest ever in exit polls that have asked the question, surpassing the Great Recession.
Not just Donald Trump winning the election, but winning the popular vote. First time in 2 decades for a Republican. And how did he do it? He did it by transforming the Republican Party. It is now more diverse than it's ever been in modern times, and certainly much more than when Donald Trump first came on the scene 8 years ago. A lot of ways to look at this. How about this here? When it says pre-Trump, that's the last presidential election before Donald Trump started running. You got to go back to 2012 for that. Remember, 3 straight elections, Trump's been the Republican candidate. So pre-Trump, voters under 30 were going for the Democrats by 23 points. Folks with incomes under 50,000, 22 points for the Democrats. Folks without college degrees, 4 points for the Democrats. That's pre-Trump. What comes out of this election? Look at some of these shifts. The youth vote, that Democratic margin cut more than in half. Voters under 50,000, now a Republican constituency. Voters without a college degree, look at that shift. Now a core Republican constituency. And then we can talk about race, ethnicity. This gets into that diversity I mentioned a minute ago. Check this out. Again, pre-Trump versus now. The black vote still overwhelmingly Democratic, but that's a 15-point shift. It used to be 87 points for the Democrats, down to 72. How about this? You've heard a lot about it this week. This is what the numbers look like. Hispanic voters were 44 points Democratic before Donald Trump. Now, basically a toss-up constituency, and Asian Americans, a 32-point shift there as well. That's what's happened to the Republican Party since Donald Trump became its standard bearer 8 years ago. This has been the movement. Trump swept the battlegrounds. But the other big story this week has to do with the popular vote and how Trump pulled that off. Here's one answer. Big blue states with very diverse populations. This new coalition that Donald Trump's assembled, it meant that he didn't win any of these, but he made some giant strides. California, biggest of them all, 29-point Biden win 4 years ago. Currently, only 18 for Harris, her home state. Look at New York. Basically, Trump cutting that Democratic margin in half. Go down this list and look inside those states and you'll see it. Blue-collar areas, cities, metro areas with large Hispanic populations, that's where Trump made his big gains there. We'll land on this one map, one battleground state that I think tells the story of these two coalitions here visually. Let's call up Wisconsin. We know in this election, Donald Trump, you're looking at a pre-Trump election, because I just want to show you, this is what a battleground state looked like not that long ago. When Barack Obama ran and carried the state over John McCain, look at all the blue here. So many of these are small rural counties with blue-collar populations. Barack Obama could sweep almost all these counties. Democrats were competitive here. Take a look at this map, and I'm going to call up what just happened this week. All that blue has become, look at all that red. All of those blue-collar areas with Donald Trump as the Republican leader for the last 8 years have moved this dramatically to the Republicans, and it's left the Democrats relying more than ever on areas like Madison, Wisconsin, Milwaukee County, areas that have large populations of voters with college degrees, of higher-income voters, of progressive voters. And in this election, Kristen, it just wasn't enough for the Democrats to lean on that when they've lost so much ground with blue-collar voters elsewhere.
Steve, it is just striking to look at that map of Wisconsin and, frankly, all the results that you laid out.
With a final tally of 312 electoral votes, Republicans scored their biggest White House win in 36 years. Republicans will also control the Senate with at least 52 seats, and there are two races that have not yet been called by CBS News.
Man, I cannot wait to get into this video, you guys. Wow. We told y'all it was coming, and I want to just send a huge shout out to Election Time and many others, On Point Politics, Silver. I mean, a lot of accurate posters and people we use, you know, this election, for this election, and all that, you know, the polls, everything, man, and how spot on we were. It's ridiculous how spot on we were in predicting 312. You know, we had from 312 to 330. We had mix of numbers, but 312 kept coming up, man. And to see that number on that map, it's mind blowing, man. I told y'all, history will be made if this was a fair, free election, you know. But again, want to send a huge shout out to amazing posters, amazing mappers, and people that did such an amazing job. That we got a chance to use, and a lot of content creators and posters and amazing people reached out to me to share this information on my channel. So it was a blessing, man, to get so much love and support throughout this entire election, man. I really appreciate you guys. And again, we're gonna make America great again, baby. And they're already hitting the ground running, as you can see. And we're gonna continue to bring you amazing updates. But I could not wait to check out this video. I could not wait to, I just couldn't wait, man. Let's go and jump in, y'all. Make sure if you haven't already, hit that like button. Subscribe to the channel if you're new here. And comment down below, how do you feel about this, man? You know, we all played a huge part in this, man. And it was actually too big to rig, baby. Too big to rig. Yes, indeed. We showed up, y'all. I told y'all we couldn't get complacent. And if we didn't get complacent and we showed up, it was going to look exactly like it was supposed to look. And it sure did. You know?
The final results of the 2024 presidential election are now in. With the call in Arizona last night for Donald Trump, the map is officially complete. And in this video, we'll be taking a deep dive into the numbers from every single state, of course, with more emphasis on the notable races. But there really are a lot of interesting shifts to look at as Donald Trump crushed expectations all across the board. We'll start off on the West Coast, where Washington, Oregon, and California were solid for Kamala Harris. Anything over 12% is solid, 5 to 12 is likely, 1 to 5 is lean, and less than 1% is tilt. And so starting off up in Washington, Kamala Harris wins the state by 19 points, basically the exact same margin Biden won it by 4 years ago. In Oregon, Kamala Harris wins by 15. Again, very close to the incumbent president's margin from 2020. But in California, this is where it hurts for the vice president. president, Kamala Harris wins her home state by just 19%. She is literally from California. She served as California Attorney General, as well as being a U.S. Senator from the state for 4 years before becoming a vice president in 2021. Joe Biden, for reference, won California by 29.2%. 4 years later, Kamala Harris at the top of the ticket, she wins her home state by 10 points less. So California is still a solid blue. It's still over a 12-point margin, but it's nowhere near where it was 4 years ago. Next up in Nevada, we have a major flip for Donald Trump. This is the first of 7 swing states, and Donald Trump becomes the first Republican to win the silver state in 20 years. Nevada hasn't voted red since 2004 and the re-election of George W. Bush. They went to Obama by a whopping 12.5% margin in 2008. Now, in 2012, that margin dropped down to 6.7, and then it was 2.4 in the last 2 cycles. So Nevada has been shifting right for quite a while now. They elected a Republican governor in 2022, so it's not the biggest surprise in the world that Trump was able to flip Nevada, but it is still a notable accomplishment as Trump wins by his largest margin yet. He is also winning the popular vote. He's probably going to win a majority. He's currently at 50.5%, ahead of Harris by 2.5 points. This is larger than Hillary Clinton's popular vote margin from 2016. In Nevada specifically, Trump is on track to win by 4 points. So the state is going to be lean in favor of the GOP, but it's right under a 5-point margin. I, of course, correctly called this state for the former president, but still, Trump did do slightly better than I expected. Even in Clark County, this is where Democrats get an overwhelming majority of their support. Kamala Harris is at just 51%. Joe Biden won this county by nearly 10 4 years ago. And so Nevada, it's going to be the first flip on the map. It is going to be lean Republican. Meanwhile, in Arizona, this was the last state to be called, and Donald Trump is on track to win by nearly 7 points. His performance in Arizona has been absolutely incredible. I mean, he is literally going to win Maricopa County. This is where Phoenix is located. This should be one of the most Democrat areas in the state, but Donald Trump is somehow winning there. Now, of course, Kari Lake has lost her race for U.S. Senate. She was the wrong choice. Literally anybody else could have won. Your friend probably could have won if they were made the nominee in Arizona for Senate. Literally your random friend that knows nothing about politics would have done better than Kari Lake. But Donald Trump right now, he is on track to crush Kamala Harris in a state that Joe Biden won in the last election. Arizona was blue in 2020. Go back to 2016. Trump wins Arizona by 3.5. So Trump today, in a state that is supposedly shifting left, he has performed better in Arizona in 2024 than he did originally against Hillary Clinton. And so the state is not going to be lean red. It is actually going to be likely Republican, despite being seen as one of the top 7 battlegrounds. Results in Colorado, though, they're pretty similar to what they were in 2020. Kamala Harris wins the state by 11 points. Joe Biden carried it by nearly 14, so still a drop-off, but not as significant as in many other places on the map. And in New Mexico, Kamala Harris wins by just over 5 points. This was a pretty significant decrease in support for Democrats as Hispanic voters continue to shift more and more in favor of Trump and the Republicans. Kamala Harris is on track to win New Mexico by 6 points, right above the 5-point threshold for a state to be solid. So both Colorado and New Mexico will be likely for Kamala Harris. And then in Texas, Donald Trump did surprisingly well here. He was on track to win by around 8 to 10 points in the polls. I personally had it at around a double-digit margin. Obviously, he was going to do well. I did say it was going to be his largest margin yet. He's going to outperform his 9-point margin of victory from back in 2016. That was exactly what he did, but he actually did even more. Donald Trump is on track to win the Lone Star State by 14%, the largest margin since Mitt Romney in 2012. It's basically rivaling that margin, but Trump is going to win Texas by 14 points. I mean, he won Fort Worth by 5 points in 2020. Joe Biden won this county. In Collin County, where Dallas is located, Kamala Harris barely won. I mean, a 12-point margin in one of the biggest cities in the entire country. I mean, that is absolutely abysmal. Kamala Harris has put Democrats decades behind now in Texas. This is a state that's supposed to be shifting left. That is clearly no longer the case.
Rick is going to return. Y'all know I'm from Texas, born and raised, where I reside. Rick is going to be purple. Rick is going blue is blue. And when we seen them votes start coming out, I said, oh boy, wait a minute. Texas is blue right now. And then I looked like 5 minutes up back at the screen, and that thing was redder than red. Man, y'all come on with all that crap, man. Come on now, not the Lone Star State, baby.
Donald Trump outperformed his 2020 margin by 9 points when he won the state by just 5. And so Texas is going to be a solid red for the first time in 12 years. Up here in the middle of the country, these states out west in the Great Plains, Donald Trump is going to win every single one of them by solid margins. Utah, Wyoming, Idaho, Montana, North and South Dakota, all of Nebraska except its 2nd district, as well as Kansas and Oklahoma, all Trump country here. Now, in the 2nd district, Kamala Harris is on track to win by just 4 points, a drop from 7 4 years ago, even though the district lines were changed and made to be more liberal than they were in the past, the 2nd district. So Kamala Harris once again disappoints. In Alaska, Trump is on track to win by 16, and in Hawaii, Kamala Harris is on track to win by 24. So Alaska will be solid red, Hawaii solid blue, and the 2nd district of Nebraska lean for the Democrats. We're going to come up to the Midwest now. This was the region Kamala Harris needed to dominate in if she wanted to win the election. I mean, I said she needed Minnesota, Wisconsin, Illinois, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. She needed to win all 4 of them to get the 270 electoral votes, and she could not have been more disappointing. I mean, her performance here was just abysmal. Democrats right now in the Midwest are in the worst position they have been in since the 1980s. I mean, Kamala Harris did so much worse than even Hillary Clinton. I mean, there are a lot of people, myself included, that did believe that Harris would at least outperform the former Secretary of State, but clearly that didn't happen. I mean, just look at Minnesota. This is literally Governor Tim Walz's home state, and Kamala Harris wins it by just 4 points. I mean, this is absolutely disappointing for the Democrats. It's the state with the longest streak of voting for the Democrats in presidential elections. I mean, no Republican has won Minnesota in 52 years. The last time it went where
Tampon Timmy. And Gwen Walls out there. Gwen Walls talking about, repeat after me. Bye-bye, Mr. Trump. Bye-bye, Mr. Vance. Talking to people like voters like little kids. Unbelievable. What did they expect?
Red was 1972, and still, Kamala Harris wins the state by just 4 points, even though she gets the boost with Tim Walz being on the ticket with her. This is just yet another example of Kamala Harris doing poorly in states that she should easily be winning. And so Minnesota is only going to be lean for Harris on the map. Next up in Iowa, I mean, this was a state Trump was expected to lose, at least based on the quote-unquote most accurate poll in the state, the one conducted by the Des Moines Register and Ann Seltzer. The poll ended up being 16 points wrong. They had Kamala Harris winning by 3. Ultimately, Trump wins Iowa by 16 points. It could not have been better for the former president. This is Trump's largest margin in Iowa yet, after winning it by 9 points in 2016 and by 8 in 2020. So Iowa has now moved firmly into the solid Republican camp. Meanwhile, in Wisconsin, we have the only tilt state on the map. This is the only state that will be decided by less than 1%. And in Wisconsin, Donald Trump is on track to win by 0.9%. He might edge over that 1 point margin with some of the final ballots waiting to be counted, but for right now, it is expected to be a 0.9% margin of victory. Wisconsin, out of all 3 of the upper Midwestern states, is actually the most liberal now, even though in the last 2 cycles, it always voted to the right of its 2 eastern neighbors. So Wisconsin, it's going to be tilt Republican, but the 3rd flip on the map for the former president. And then in Illinois, I mean, this is not a state that we would typically even talk about. I mean, it's gone to Democrats by 17 points in the last 3 elections, basically 17 points exactly. Obama, Clinton, Biden, no change in the margin whatsoever, but boy, was there a change this time around. Illinois is the most competitive it's been since the early 2000s. I mean, just look at Kamala Harris's margin of victory. She's going to win it by just 9%. We went from 17 points 3 times in a row now to just 9 line when Kamala Harris has become the Democratic nominee. I mean, this is an embarrassing margin. Her performance in Chicago was terrible. I mean, this should be one of the most liberal counties in the country, and sure, a 39-point margin is a lot, but honestly, it should be closer to 40 or 50, and so that is why Illinois has become a lot more competitive. It is no longer a solid blue state. It can only be placed into the likely Harris column. Indiana, though, is of course going to be solid Trump, even without Mike Pence on the ticket. And then up in Michigan, Donald Trump makes his fourth flip on the map. He's going to win the state by 1.4%. He's going to do better in Michigan than in Wisconsin, but not as well as he will do in Pennsylvania, which we'll look at in just a few moments. But Michigan was expected to go to Kamala Harris. This was the most liberal of all 7 swing states. At least that's what it looked like. So if there was any one battleground that Kamala Harris was going to win, it was going to be Michigan. But the moment it seemed like she was going to lose it, it was over for the vice president. Kamala Harris couldn't win without Michigan. She also, of course, needed Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, but if Michigan seemed out of sight, it really was over. Kamala Harris lost the election so quickly. I mean, very early on in the night, we knew that Donald Trump would be elected the 47th president just because of how poorly Harris did in the upper Midwest. So Michigan is going to be the fourth flip on the map for Trump, and it will be the second lean red state. Next up in Ohio, it is just under the threshold for a state to be solid. It is going to be likely Republican, with Donald Trump winning by 11 points. He was so close, but this is still a 3-point gain for Republicans in the state compared to 2020. Ohio is going to be likely Trump. Meanwhile, in Pennsylvania, we have the 5th flip on the map for the former president. He's on track to win the state by 3%. I mean, this really is incredible. A 3-point margin in a state that Joe Biden carried by over 1 from 4 years ago. I did have Pennsylvania as being the most right-leaning of all 3 of the upper Midwestern swing states, and a 3% margin isn't too surprising considering Trump's incredible performances all across the country. Erie County went red. This is the bellwether county for Pennsylvania. It's correctly predicted results in the state for over a century, I believe. And yes, Joe Biden did win Erie County in 2020, but of course, Trump has since flipped it back. Pennsylvania is also going to be lean red on the map, the 3rd so far. Moving up to the Northeast now, this is a region that we generally don't talk too much about because of how liberal it is. I mean, Democrats are just going to win. That's basically been the law of the land there. But now we actually do have a significant shift. The Northeast has finally become competitive. Now, there are still quite a few states where Kamala Harris was able to win by 12 points or more. Vermont, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, as well as Joe Biden's home state of Delaware, Maryland, and the District of Columbia, just to get them out of the way. And so we'll start off in New York, a state where Kamala Harris is on track to win by less than 12 points. If you look at the actual margin, it is right under 12 points. So the Empire State will be likely blue. This is the worst margin for any Democrat going back to 1988. I mean, Kamala Harris's performances have been record-breaking in terms of just how bad they've been for Democrats. I mean, every single Democrat since 1992 has won New York by a solid margin. Kamala Harris also did terribly in New Jersey, a state where Democrats win by at least 15 points every single time. Hillary Clinton did bad. She won by 14, but not nearly as bad as Kamala Harris, because she's on track to win New Jersey by just 6%. Yes, just 6% separated the vice president and the former president in what was considered a Democrat stronghold. New Jersey went to Biden by 16 points 4 years ago. Now it is even more competitive than Arizona. So New Jersey is only going to be likely blue on the map, barely above that 5-point threshold, and New York will also be likely blue, right under the threshold for a state to be solid. Meanwhile, in New Jersey and Maine, results were also a lot closer than expected, especially in New Hampshire, where Kamala Harris is currently on track to win by 3%. Polling had her up by 7-8 points at one point. Obviously, she was never going to do that well, but still, a 3-point margin is surprisingly low. We thought that Democrats were going to do well here because they did outperform expectations in the midterms. Maggie Hassan won her re-election to the Senate by a double-digit margin, but clearly, New Hampshire is still one of the closest states in the country, so the state will be the second lean blue race on the map. Meanwhile, up in Maine, Kamala Harris is currently on track to win by 7. This is with ranked choice voting, while the 1st district, of course, will go solid blue. Kamala Harris on track track to win by 21, and the 2nd district will be likely for Trump. He's on track to win by 9. So basically exactly as I called it in my final prediction, a Maine at large.
Did y'all notice something fishy in all these states that she won? If you know, you know. And I'm pretty sure we'll get that thing fixed, situated, as it should be. Most people call it common sense. You know? I say proof of this, proof of that, you know. Same week, same day. You know. Common sense stuff, you know. But the ones that she won, it was a little fishy in the ones that she won. And if you know, you know.
Likely blue. The 1st district, solid blue. 2nd district, likely Trump. And now coming down to the deep south, Donald Trump is going to easily carry Missouri, Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee, Kentucky, West Virginia, and South Carolina. There was absolutely no contest in these states. Trump won by incredible margins. Meanwhile, up in Virginia, Kamala Harris barely takes the state by 5%. It's barely over a 5-point margin, so Virginia will be likely blue, but it was very close to falling into that lean range. I mean, I made videos about it.
And again, if you're still thinking about it, she won states where voter ID is not required.
How competitive Virginia was going to be. Ultimately, what I said pretty much came true. I never said that Donald Trump was actually going to win Virginia, but it was going to be a lot more competitive than it was 4 years ago. For reference, Joe Biden carried the state by over 10 points. It was a double-digit margin. Kamala Harris wins basically by just half of the incumbent president's margin of victory from the last election. So this really is a disappointing performance for Democrats in a state that's generally been shifting to the left over the last 2 decades, but clearly that trend has reversed, just like in Nevada, as of course in Virginia, they elected a Republican governor back in 2021, so Virginia is barely going to be likely for Harris. And then in North Carolina, this is the 6th of the 7 swing states we have to cover. And of course, North Carolina was also a state where Trump outperformed expectations. He won by 3%. Polling had him leading by around 1-2. Ultimately, I had him winning by around 1-2 as well, but a 3-point margin. He definitely outperformed expectations here, especially with Mark Robinson losing the race for governor by a solid margin. The split ticketing here really was incredible. Josh Stein did so much better than Kamala Harris, and so that kind of did worry me. I did think that because of how blue the governor's race was going to be, the presidential election would also be a little bit closer, but it seems that it hasn't really affected Trump all that much. He won basically by his 2016 margin when he defeated Hillary Clinton by 3.7%. He did much better than 2020 when he won by just 1.3. So North Carolina also takes a huge step to the right. It'll be the 4th lean red state on the map. And of course, we also do have a 5th, exactly as I predicted it. Georgia is lean Republican. Donald Trump wins by 2%. It's actually surprising, though, that Georgia is voting to the left of both Nevada, North Carolina, and Pennsylvania, as this state historically has had a very long streak of voting Republican, but it is definitely clear that Georgia has shifted to the left quite a bit over the last decade. That's why they have 2 Democrat senators right now, one of which was reelected back in 2022, but generally the state is still more conservative than it is liberal. That's why Brian Kemp won re-election 2 years ago. That's why Trump wins Georgia for a second time after losing it by just 1/4 of a percentage point to Joe Biden in 2020. So Georgia will also be lean Republican. This is the 6th flip on the map, and with the state filled in, Donald Trump officially goes 7 for 7 in the swing states. And finally, in Florida, I mean, we've kind of neglected this state over the last few months simply because it hasn't been competitive, but there actually is quite a bit to talk about in the Sunshine State. Not only did Trump win it for a 3rd time, he won it by far the largest margin yet.
And them results came quick. And when the first wasn't one of the first ones dropped, it came. Like, man, why couldn't everybody else be like Florida?
it by 13 points. He actually flips Miami-Dade County. He wins it by 11%. This is the county that Hillary Clinton won by nearly 30 points back in 2016. I mean, the change here has been absolutely incredible. Florida was not always this red. At one point, it favored Democrats more than Republicans. I mean, just look at the shift from 2016. Trump wins it by 1.2%. It was a flip. It was a surprise. Nobody thought Trump would actually win Florida. In 2020, Trump wins it by 3 times that margin, even though, once again, people thought Joe Biden was going to flip Florida back. And now in 2024, people did admit that he was going to win the state for a third time, but nobody thought he would actually win by a 13-point margin. I mean, this is much larger than expected. I did have Trump winning by around 10 points, but 13, he definitely did outperform even my expectations. So Florida is going to be solid red. Iowa, Texas, Florida, all 3 states were likely 4 years ago. Florida was even lean, but now they have all moved into the solid category. And so this is the final 2024 electoral map. Trump at 312, Kamala Harris at 226. You can see the map here with margins. This is something the mainstream media will not provide you, but if you wanted to see just the map as a whole with the flips, this is what it looks like on the New York Times. It's pretty much what all the maps look like, but if you want to see how well the candidates actually did, this gives you a much better representation. Donald Trump does very well in both the Sun Belt and the Midwest, especially in Arizona. That was a state where polling did suggest a large margin of victory for Donald Trump, and ultimately that did come true. Now,